have a couple of things to talk about. Well, hi everyone, welcome to Pal to Tech. A couple of days ago, I launched a full review of the Fujifilm X-M5 camera. So the video itself is just under 30 minutes, right? It's about 27, 32 or so. However, the 4 separate studio talking head segments that I shot actually totaled over 3 hours of footage. Now, I had 2 separate deadlines for this video. The first was I had to return the X-M5 camera back to Fuji, but the second deadline was I wanted to have the video finished in time for the actual launch of the camera. However, as it turned out, I did not launch my video on the day that the camera was released because I didn't feel it was ready and I didn't feel that it provided enough value for you. And so what happened was I had to start cutting various segments. And 2 areas that I sort of wish I could go back in time and add more footage. The first was additional footage I had shot regarding the autofocus testing. Okay, I'm going to show you that in just a sec. And the second was I hacked into a RAW file from the camera. Let me now show you the autofocus testing that you haven't seen yet. So for this test, you can see that I'm shooting with f2.8. And because I was by myself, what I ended up doing was putting the camera, and this is a trick you can do too, using the interval timer on the camera so that the camera will just automatically keep taking shots while I'm moving around. And the camera was taking 1 shot, every 1 second as I was moving around. I had the camera set to the AFC focusing mode with Face Eye Auto Detect enabled. And I think part of the reason that I didn't include this particular test in the final video, if I'm being totally honest with myself, is because I think I look absolutely ridiculously stupid in these shots, okay? When you're on YouTube and you're in front of a lot of people, you do kind of notice these things. So don't say anything. Just watch the test, okay? Have a look right down here and you can see the numerical order of each of these shots. I'm not skipping any of them. So here's the first one in the sequence when I turned it on, and now boom, this was the first shot using that interval timer mode. I'll zoom in 100%. And yeah, we are a little bit out of focus. It's not perfectly clear. Here's the next one. Zooming into 200%. This one more or less nailed the focus. Here's the next one. Eyes closed in this shot, going in and out. Now I'm completely out of frame. Back in frame, boom, the second I came back in. And again, this is what was going on in the actual scene. Going back to the images, here we are. Next one. It is nailing it though. It is catching it. I'm pretty far away. Let's zoom in. Okay, again. And we're out of focus here for sure. Definitely out of focus there, but reacquired focus. Not too bad actually on this one. Focus, focus, and then out of frame. Jumped in really close to the lens and it didn't acquire it fast enough here. And that's it. Okay. So here's another test that I didn't include in the video as much as I probably should have. And one of the most noticeable changes that I saw in doing all of the testing was that between the other cameras like the X-T5 versus the X-M5, the focus square overall in Face Eye Auto Detect generally does a better job of either staying with the face, or if it drops off and loses tracking with the face, it reacquires that tracking faster. For example, right here, it was lost on both cameras. And you can see it gone now. Both are out of focus and they're coming back roughly at the same time. However, look, on the X-T5, it just dropped off and disappeared in this frame. You see that right here? Whereas on the X-M5, it's still on the face, then it loses it again, and then on the X-T5, it reacquires it. And you can see it's just closer overall. And on the X-T5, it goes a little further beyond. You see that right there? And we could talk about, focus squares all day, but at the end of the day, what I'm noticing, if you look at these images, is that as I'm moving back and in and out, overall, my ugly mug, right, is more in focus on the X-M5. I feel like I'm going through the Zapruder film frame by frame with this stuff. Here's another test I did that I had cut for time where I was shooting in f5, that's for sure, on the X-M5. This is AFC mode in video shooting with tracking. And what I was doing was testing out the touchscreen and tapping between this wooden post, you see that right there, with the foliage on the background. And what I found was it was extremely fast with switching from focusing on the post to the background. Now for my final bit of footage, I'd like to show you some actual photos that were shot. In this test right here, I had the camera on AFC, multi-purpose, We're at f4 on this one. Face eye auto detect is turned on. Burst mode is at high, and I tell her, okay, start moving, jumping up and down, move around a little bit. Let's flip over and look at the actual images from that shoot. And this was using the 15 to 45 millimeter XF lens that is sold as the kit lens with the camera. So we have one of them right here out of focus. Next one, right back in focus. Another one out of focus. Another one out of focus. We're back in focus. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again. A little bit out of frame, let me move it up. And these are all in focus. Let me move it over. Move it over. And we're back out of focus on this one, and back in focus. And as you can see, a vast majority of these are in focus. And more of these were in focus on this camera than I've gotten in cameras past. Now, like any review that I've done, autofocus is not the only thing that I talk about. And there were so many other segments that I cut. One of them that I wish that I had included was when I tested the X-M5's dynamic range. So have a look at it right now, and then we're going to talk about something else. Now, the camera comes included with 5 separate HDR options. And as you know, when you're dealing with a high dynamic range image, you are generally going to want to work on the raw file. But I ran into a problem, okay? Because I had the camera before launch date, Capture One, any of the Adobe software, nothing, nobody was able to recognize or read the raw files out of this camera. They wouldn't recognize it at all, but there was no way I was going to make this video and not check out a raw file from this camera. I mean, come on. So your Uncle Pal to Tech had to hack the raw file. I actually did. I went in, I modified the EXIF data and edited the actual raw files that came out of this camera to fool the software to think that these raw files came from an X106. But just know that what I'm about to show you is the result of a hacked raw file, okay? It's not representative of probably what a camera reviewer should have done. Okay, so for this series of images, they were all shot with the same camera settings. The only difference is the HDR options were changed. The first is a straight out of camera JPEG shot on the HDR auto setting. And you can see that it did a really good job with it. And here's the actual raw file before it was processed in camera. And this one is 800 applied. Here's before, here's after. And finally, there is HDR plus. Here's before and after. And yeah, it did a lot of processing to this image. You see that? Okay, so as you can see, I do have those raw files. So here we have the actual raw file that came out of the X-M5. And you have right here a fairly blown out scene right at this spot. If I zoom in 100% to this area right here, and I just turned on my highlights. Here it is before and after right there. You see that? When you're doing that to a raw file in camera, like if you're shooting with the camera and you're using the automatic HDR function, right? And then you're getting that resulting JPEG, the camera is just adding that to the entire image. And you may not want that. But what's great about post-production editing with raw files is that you can selectively edit various parts of your image to bring up or down the highlights and the shadows. That was the point I was trying to make. And I actually had a whole lesson that I shot for the video that I was going to include, but I really wanted to emphasize that it is so important to have that raw file if you really want to have that flexibility and just change the overall look of the photo. There's so much that you can do. Well, anyhow, I hope this additional footage was interesting for you. You know, when you're making these videos, you never know what the audience is going to think. You're basically staring into, you know, an empty lens when you're talking. You don't know what's important to people. You can have a hunch on it, but when you're in the editing room and you're actually cutting this down and you're saying to yourself, yeah, shorten it, shorten it. People have less attention spans. They're probably not going to be interested in that and maybe more interested in this. It's tough to balance that out. And so sometimes I want to revisit a video and kind of show you additional footage that I probably should have put in. I didn't. But you got a chance to see it today. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you in a new video very soon. Take care.